In the sleepy town of Maplewood, nestled in the heart of the countryside, lived a man named George Braden. George was the town's beloved handyman, known for his knack for fixing everything from leaky faucets to broken fences. Though his work was modest, George took immense pride in it, always with a cheerful attitude and a warm smile. One day, George received a peculiar request from Mrs. Eleanor Grayson, the elderly lady who lived in the grand house at the edge of town. Mrs. Grayson's home was a marvel of classic architecture, but its once pristine garden had fallen into disarray over the years. The garden was now a tangled mess of weeds and overgrown plants, and Mrs. Grayson wanted it restored to its former glory. George, always eager to help, accepted the task. As he examined the garden, he couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. The garden had been beautiful once, but it was now a shadow of its former self. Determined to bring it back to life, George rolled up his sleeves and began the daunting task. For weeks, George worked tirelessly, digging, planting, and pruning. He poured his heart into every inch of the garden, hoping to recreate the beauty that once was. Mrs. Grayson visited occasionally, her eyes brimming with gratitude and nostalgia as she watched the transformation. One brisk autumn morning, as George was putting the finishing touches on the garden, he discovered a hidden compartment beneath a large, gnarled oak tree. Inside was an old, dusty box with a brass lock. Intrigued, George carefully pried it open and found a collection of photographs, letters, and a beautifully illustrated journal. The journal was a treasure trove of memories, chronicling the history of the garden and the love that had gone into it. It was filled with entries from Mrs. Grayson's late husband, Henry, who had once tended the garden with the same care and devotion that George had now restored it with. Touched by the journal's contents, George realized that this garden held more than just plants. It was a living memory of love and dedication. He decided to surprise Mrs. Grayson with the journal as a tribute to her late husband's legacy. On the day of the garden's grand unveiling, Mrs. Grayson arrived with a bouquet of flowers, her face lit with anticipation. George led her to the garden, which now bloomed with vibrant colors and neatly trimmed hedges. Mrs. Grayson gasped in delight, her eyes filling with tears as she took in the sight. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It's more beautiful than I ever imagined." George then presented the old box and the journal. As Mrs. Grayson read the heartfelt entries and looked at the photographs, she was overcome with emotion. "Henry always wanted to restore this garden, but we never had the chance. Thank you for bringing his dream to life." The real twist came when Mrs. Grayson, with a beaming smile, revealed that the journal had a hidden message for George. "Henry left a note here for someone special who would care for the garden," she said, handing George a letter. The letter was a heartfelt thank you from Henry, acknowledging the love and dedication George had poured into the garden. The town celebrated the restored garden with a community gathering, and George was hailed as a hero. The garden became a cherished spot for Maplewood residents, a symbol of love and community spirit. In the end, George's simple act of kindness had not only fulfilled Mrs. Grayson's dream, but had also unearthed a legacy of love that connected the past and present. The garden flourished, and so did the bond between George and the townspeople, reminding everyone that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most profound and beautiful surprises.
You